I'm curious, what sparked your interest in Vedanta in the first place?
Oh, that's a great question to start with. I think it's just fascinating how Vedanta, this ancient Indian philosophical tradition, is still so relevant today. It's woven into everything from spiritual practices to
Right.
ethical movements and even modern psychology.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then.
Mhm.
Um, we're diving into the Upanishads first,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
These ancient texts are kind of like the bedrock of Vedanta, right?
absolutely. Yeah. The Upanishads really lay the foundation.
Yeah. Okay.
Imagine wise sages contemplating the universe, asking those big questions. What is existence? Who are we? What's the point of it all?
Yeah.
The Upanishads really grapple with these profound concepts.
So what kind of answers did they come up with?
Well, one of the core ideas is this concept of Brahman.
Okay.
And Brahman is the ultimate reality, the essence underlying everything.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. Brahman isn't something you can define or
No.
put in a box. It's beyond our usual ideas of space and time. It's
Yeah.
more like this infinite, eternal source of all existence.
That's a pretty heady concept. So how do we as individuals fit into this picture of Brahman?
Yeah, so that's where the concept of Atman comes in.
Okay.
Atman is our true self, our innermost essence.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The Upanishads say that Atman is identical to Brahman.
Whoa.
They use this powerful phrase, tat tuvamasi, thou art that,
Okay.
to express this mind-blowing idea of unity.
Okay, hold on. So you're saying that deep down, we're all connected to this ultimate reality, this Brahman. It's not me over here and the universe over there,
Yep.
but like a fundamental oneness.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a radical shift in perspective.
Right.
We're not separate individuals looking out at a vast universe, but rather expressions of that very universe, each containing the essence of Brahman within.
Wow.
No wonder this idea has captivated thinkers for centuries.
So if we're all part of this Brahman, this ultimate reality, does that mean we're all already perfect, already enlightened?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another key concept, which is moksha. And moksha is liberation from this cycle of birth and death.
Mm-hmm.
Vedanta suggests that while we have the potential for this unity with Brahman,
Right.
we often identify with our limited selves, our egos,
Yeah.
and get caught in the cycle of suffering.
Mm.
Moksha is about realizing our true nature as Atman, breaking free from that limited perspective.
So it's not just about intellectually understanding these concepts, but actually experiencing this connection, this unity in our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense.
And to help us along this path, we have other important texts, like the Brahma Sutras,
Okay.
and they try to systematize those sometimes cryptic teachings found in the Upanishads.
Mhm.
And then there's the Bhagavad Gita, which
Right.
offers a more practical guide on
Yeah.
how to apply these ideas to everyday life.
Mhm.
Together, these texts really form the bedrock of Vedantic philosophy.
Okay, so we have these foundational texts, but then how did all these different schools of thought within Vedanta come about? Was there some big debate or something?
It's not so much about debates,
That
but
would-
rather different interpretations of
Yeah.
these core texts. Vedanta is like a vibrant tapestry woven from different schools of thought, each offering a unique lens through which to understand those foundational ideas.
So it's more like different perspectives on the same reality, kind of like how different artists might paint different interpretations of the same landscape.
That's a great analogy, yeah. So let's take a quick tour of some of these schools to see how they approach these core Vedantic principles.
Okay.
First up, we have Advaita Vedanta.
Okay.
Now, this school was championed by Adi Shankaracharya, and they're all about non-duality. For them, Brahman is the only true reality, and the world we perceive is Maya, which is illusion.
Okay.
Liberation, in their view, comes from realizing that oneness, that there's nothing but Brahman.
So they're saying the world is an illusion. That seems a bit hard to wrap my head around.
It's definitely a challenging concept.
Yeah.
And not all schools agree.
Wow.
Take Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. This one was founded by Ramanuja. They acknowledge the ultimate reality of Brahman, but also see the world and individual souls as real and important.
Okay.
For them, Brahman is a personal god, often Vishnu, and devotion is key to achieving liberation.
So it's more like The world is an expression of Brahman rather than a complete illusion.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you have Dvaita Vedanta, developed by Madhvacharya.
Okay.
They take a more dualistic approach,
Right.
emphasizing the distinction between the individual soul and Brahman.
Okay.
For them, devotion to a personal deity and divine grace are crucial for achieving liberation.
So we've got these different schools, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Vaita, all with their unique interpretations. Are there any other schools we should know about?
Yeah, there are a few others, like Vedanta, which tries to find a balance between duality and non-duality, and Shuddhadvaita, which focuses on pure non-duality and devotion to Krishna. Then there's Achintya Bheda, which blends these ideas in a unique way. It's amazing how much intellectual richness emerged from those foundational texts.
Wow, so many different perspectives within Vedanta itself.
Yeah.
That makes me wonder, how on earth did people even begin to wrap their heads around these complex ideas?
Right.
What were they doing in their daily lives that led them to these realizations?
That's a question worth pondering. And it takes us to the heart of what makes Vedanta so fascinating, its enduring relevance. It's not just an ancient philosophy. It's a living tradition that continues to inspire and challenge us today. But before we jump into that, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered so far. What stands out to you from these foundational ideas?
I think what strikes me most is this idea of tattvam asi, that we're not separate from this ultimate reality, this Brahman. It's a radical shift in perspective, and I'm curious to explore how this idea plays out in the lives of actual people, both historically and in the present day.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And it leads us perfectly to our next exploration, how Vedanta has moved beyond ancient India and into the modern era, shaping lives and movements in surprising ways.
Okay.
Let's dive in.
Let's do it. All right, so we've laid the groundwork with Upanishads, Brahman, Atman, and even touched on those diverse schools of thought.
Yeah.
Now I'm ready for the time machine.
Okay.
How did Vedanta make the leap from ancient texts to actually impacting people's lives in the modern world?
Well, that's where some remarkable figures enter the picture. People who took those ancient ideas and made them accessible to a modern audience.
Right.
Think of them as bridges between ancient wisdom and contemporary life.
Okay, I'm picturing bridges.
Okay.
Who are some of these bridge-building figures?
Well, one of the most influential was Swami Vivekananda.
Yeah.
He brought Vedanta to the world stage in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Right.
What's fascinating about Vivekananda is that he didn't just present Vedanta as a set of beliefs. He emphasized its practical application,
Okay.
especially its potential for social change.
So he saw a connection between spiritual growth
Yeah.
and actually making the world a better place.
Absolutely. Yeah, he believed that Vedanta's vision of oneness, that Tattvamasi we were talking about,
Right.
could inspire social reform
Yeah.
and create a more just and compassionate world.
Mm-hmm.
His message resonated with people across cultures and backgrounds, showing that Vedanta wasn't just for scholars or monks, it had something to offer everyone.
That's really interesting. So it's not about withdrawing from the world to contemplate Brahman, but actually using those insights to make a positive impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Vivekananda wasn't alone. Other figures like Paramahansa Yogananda played a key role in introducing Vedanta to the West. His Autobiography of a Yogi, became a spiritual classic, captivating readers with its accounts of meditation, Kriya Yoga, and the search for enlightenment.
So these figures help bring practices like yoga and meditation into the mainstream.
They definitely paved the way. And if you think about it, these practices are deeply rooted in Vedanta.
Yeah.
The emphasis on self-awareness, inner peace, and connecting with a deeper reality
Right.
aligns perfectly with those core Vedantic principles.
It's like Vedanta provides the philosophical foundation, and practices like yoga and meditation offer a tangible way to actually experience those truths.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's a beautiful interplay between theory and practice.
Yeah.
And it's not just yoga and medication. Think about the mindfulness movement, which is everywhere these days.
Right.
From corporate wellness programs to therapy sessions.
Yeah.
Vedanta had a hand in shaping that too.
Really?
Yeah.
How so? I always thought of mindfulness as a fairly recent phenomenon.
Well, while the term mindfulness might be more recent, the underlying concept has been around for centuries.
Okay.
Vedanta has long emphasized cultivating a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment.
Right.
In fact, there's a term in Vedanta, sthita prajna,
Okay.
which refers to a person of steady wisdom, someone who can remain calm and centered even amidst life's challenges.
Yeah.
Sound familiar?
It totally does. It's like that ideal of being present without getting swept away by our thoughts and emotions, which is what mindfulness is all about.
Yeah.
So Vedanta was kind of ahead of its time, laying the groundwork for this modern movement that's helping people find peace and well-being.
It's amazing how those ancient insights are still so relevant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it speaks to a core human need that transcends time and culture. The longing for inner peace, for a connection to something larger than ourselves.
Okay, so we've talked about Vedanta's impact on spirituality and practices like yoga and mindfulness.
Right.
But what about psychology? That seems like a totally different field.
Yeah, you might be surprised to learn how much overlap there is. Vedanta offers a deep understanding of the self, the mind, and consciousness topics that are central to psychology as well.
Yeah.
While the language and approaches might be different, there are some fascinating points of connection.
All right, I'm intrigued. Give me an example of how Vedanta and psychology intersect.
Okay, so let's take the concept of the self.
Okay.
Vedanta makes a clear distinction between the false self, or ego, and the true self, or Atman. The ego is that part of us that identifies with our body, thoughts, roles, and possessions.
Right.
It's constantly seeking validation and satisfaction from the outside world, which often leads to suffering.
So the ego is that voice in our head that's always comparing, judging, and worrying, trying to maintain a sense of control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's this identification with the ego that Vedanta sees as the root of much of our suffering.
Okay.
Then there's the true self, Atman, which is beyond all those fleeting identifications.
Right.
It's our essence, pure awareness, connected to that universal consciousness, Brahman.
So it's like Vedanta is saying that beneath all the mental chatter and emotional ups and downs, there's a deeper self that's always peaceful and connected.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And this distinction has profound implications for how we approach mental well-being.
Right.
In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for example, the focus is on identifying and changing negative thought patterns that contribute to things like anxiety and depression. This aligns beautifully with Vedanta's emphasis on recognizing and detaching from those limiting beliefs and stories that the ego clings to.
Wow, that's a really interesting connection. So CBT might approach it from a more practical, action-oriented perspective.
Yeah.
But the underlying principle is similar, freeing ourselves from the grip of the ego.
Exactly. And this connection extends to other therapeutic approaches too.
Okay.
Mindfulness-based therapies, for instance, emphasize present moment awareness and acceptance, which resonates strongly with Vedanta's teachings on detaching from the ego and simply observing the mind's fluctuations without judgment.
It's like those ancient practices are finding new life and application in the modern world, helping people to heal and thrive in ways that are both grounded in science and connected to spiritual wisdom.
It really is. And what's even more fascinating is that this cross-pollination between Vedanta and psychology isn't just a one-way street. Vedanta is also benefiting from insights from modern psychology, leading to a richer and more nuanced understanding of its principles.
So it's a two-way exchange, with each field enriching the other.
Exactly.
Right.
And this integration isn't limited to psychology.
Okay.
Neuroscience is also getting in on the action, using brain imaging techniques to study the effects of practices like meditation, which is deeply rooted in Vedanta on brain activity, emotional regulation, and overall health. Some of the findings align remarkably well with Vedanta's understanding of the mind's potential for transformation.
So it's like science is validating what those ancient sages knew all along.
Yeah.
That these practices can profoundly impact our minds and bodies.
Precisely. For example, studies on the default mode network, DMN.
Okay.
That's a network of brain regions active when our minds wander, show that meditation can quiet this network, leading to a decrease in rumination and self-criticism, which are often associated with anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
This aligns perfectly with Vedanta's focus on detaching from the ego and cultivating a more spacious awareness.
It's incredible to think that we can actually see these changes happening in the brain thanks to modern technology.
Yeah.
But what about the human side of things? I'm curious to hear about specific individuals and movements that have been influenced by Vedanta.
That's a perfect transition. Let's move from the brain lab to the world of ideas and actions.
Okay.
And explore how Vedanta has shaped the lives of notable figures and inspired movements throughout history.
All right, let's meet these Vedanta-inspired trailblazers. I'm ready for another time-traveling adventure. So we're diving into some Vedanta-inspired folks who made a real impact. Where do we even begin? I'm ready for some inspiring stories.
Well, we've already touched on Swami Vivekananda,
Right.
but his story is worth revisiting in this context. He wasn't just a teacher.
Right.
He was a visionary who saw Vedanta's potential to address the social and spiritual needs of a rapidly changing world.
Right. He was the one who brought Vedanta to a global audience. What made his approach so effective?
Well, Vivekananda was a master at bridging cultures.
Okay.
He presented Vedanta in a way that resonated with both Eastern and Western audiences, emphasizing its universality, its compatibility with science, and its potential for social good.
So he made these ancient teachings relevant to modern concerns.
Exactly. He showed that Vedanta wasn't stuck in the past.
Yeah.
It had something valuable to offer the present.
Right.
He sparked a global conversation about spirituality, self-realization, and the interconnectedness of humanity.
That's amazing. It sounds like he was planting seeds that are still growing today.
Absolutely. And then you have figures like Paramahamsa Yogananda,
Right.
who introduced countless Westerners to the power of meditation and Kriya Yoga through his book Autobiography of a Yogi. His work helped demystify these practices, making them accessible to a wider audience and paving the way for the yoga and meditation boom we see today.
It's fascinating how one person's journey can have such a ripple effect, influencing how millions of people approach their own spiritual lives.
Yeah, it's a testament to the power of lived experience, of sharing those personal stories of transformation.
Yeah.
And speaking of transformation,
Uh-huh.
let's not forget Carl Jung,
Right.
the influential Swiss psychologist.
Right. I remember reading about Jung's interest in Eastern philosophy. How did those ideas show up in his work?
Well, Jung saw parallels between Vedantic concepts and his own psychological theories.
Okay.
He was particularly drawn to the idea that beneath the surface level of the ego, there's a deeper, more universal self that connects us all. He even used the term self, with a capital S, to describe this archetype of wholeness, which resonates strongly with the concept of Atman in Vedanta.
So, in a way, Jung was bridging the gap between Eastern spirituality and Western psychology, showing that these seemingly different systems were actually exploring similar aspects of the human experience.
Precisely. And this integration wasn't just happening in the realm of psychology.
Mm.
Vedanta also influenced writers, artists, and social activists.
Right.
Aldous Huxley, for example, explored Vedantic ideas in his novels and essays, advocating for a perennial philosophy that recognized the underlying unity of all spiritual traditions.
It sounds like Vedanta was providing a framework for understanding human experience that resonated across disciplines and cultures.
That's a great observation. And this influence wasn't limited to individuals, it shaped entire movements.
Right.
We've already talked about the yoga and meditation movement, but there are other examples. The Unitarian Universalists, for instance, draw inspiration from a variety of sources, including Vedanta, in their quest for a more inclusive and compassionate approach to spirituality.
So Vedanta's impact is like a web, connecting seemingly disparate threads of human thought and action.
Yeah.
It's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it.
It really is. And this interconnectedness brings us to an exciting frontier where ancient wisdom meets modern science.
Okay.
We've already touched on how psychology and neuroscience are incorporating Vedantic ideas, but let's dive a bit deeper.
All right, lead the way. I'm ready for a glimpse into the future of Vedanta.
Well, one area where Vedanta is making significant contributions is in the field of positive psychology.
Mhm.
This branch of psychology focuses on human flourishing, exploring those qualities that enable individuals and communities to thrive.
Right.
Concepts like self-actualization, meaning, and purpose are central to positive psychology.
Uh-huh.
And guess what?
What?
These themes resonate deeply with Vedanta.
So it's like positive psychology is rediscovering those ancient insights about human potential and well-being that Vedanta has been emphasizing for centuries.
Exactly. Thinkers like Abraham Maslow, who developed the hierarchy of needs, were influenced by Vedantic ideas about self-realization.
Right.
And then you have Ken Wilber, whose integral theory integrates Eastern spiritual traditions, including Vedanta, with Western psychology and philosophy.
It sounds like Vedanta is providing a valuable lens for understanding not just what makes us suffer, but also what allows us to flourish, to live more fulfilling lives.
Precisely. And it's not just theoretical.
Right.
Neuroscience is exploring the neurological underpinnings of practices like meditation,
Yeah.
which has deep roots in Vedanta.
Right.
Studies are showing how meditation can enhance emotional regulation, reduce stress, and even promote structural changes in the brain associated with greater well-being.
So it's like science is catching up with what those ancient sages knew all along, that these practices can profoundly impact our minds and bodies.
Exactly. For instance, research on loving kindness meditation, a practice rooted in Buddhist teachings but aligned with Vedanta's emphasis on compassion, has shown increases in activity in brain regions associated with empathy and positive emotions.
Hmm.
This suggests that these practices can actually cultivate qualities like kindness and compassion at a neurological level.
That's incredible. It's like we have a whole new understanding of how these ancient practices work thanks to modern science.
It's a fascinating convergence of ancient wisdom and modern knowledge.
Yeah.
And the more we explore these intersections, the more we realize that Vedanta is not just a philosophy, it's a living tradition that continues to evolve and adapt to the needs of our time.
This deep dive has been a mind-blowing journey. We've covered so much ground, from ancient texts to modern interpretations, from global movements to individual lives.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
But before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean for us here and now?
That's the essential question, isn't it? After exploring all these facets of Vedanta, what emerges is a profound invitation to see ourselves in the world differently.
Okay.
It's a call to recognize our interconnectedness, to move beyond the limitations of the ego, and to tap into that deeper wellspring of wisdom and compassion that resides within each of us.
So it's not just about accumulating knowledge, but about actually embodying these principles in our lives.
Exactly. Vedanta offers a path, a set of practices and insights that can help us live more meaningful, fulfilling lives.
Right.
It encourages us to cultivate qualities like self-awareness, compassion, and resilience, which are essential for navigating the complexities of modern life.
It's almost like Vedanta is offering a roadmap for personal and collective transformation, a way to create a world that reflects that interconnectedness and unity that it speaks of.
That's beautifully put. And the journey begins with that simple but profound realization:
Yeah.
Atman is Brahman.
Hmm.
You are, in essence, that infinite, eternal consciousness. What might that mean for how you live, how you relate to others, how you see your place in the grand tapestry of existence?
Yeah.
That's the question I'll leave you with.
Wow. That's a lot to ponder.
Mhm.
I know I'll be thinking about that for a long time. Thanks for taking us on this incredible journey. It's clear that Vedanta has so much to offer, both intellectually and practically.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you. And remember, this is just the beginning. Vedanta is a vast and multifaceted tradition with layers upon layers of wisdom to uncover.
Right.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and see where this path leads you.
To all our listeners, if you're feeling inspired, dive into those Upanishads, explore the works of those amazing thinkers, and try out some of those practices.
Yeah.
Who knows what you might discover. And remember, as you delve deeper into Vedanta, keep that central idea in mind. Atman is Brahman. You are that. Let that realization guide you.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking.